Hello, beautiful souls. My name is John, and I'm 63 years old. What I'm about to share with you today, it's going to shake you to your core. It's a story about the deepest betrayal imaginable, when the child you raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for, turns their back on you for someone else. But more than that, it's about how sometimes, the universe has a way of delivering justice when you least expect it. Before we dive into this emotional roller coaster, I need a favor from each and every one of you watching. If this story touches your heart, if it resonates with your soul, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me continue sharing these real-life stories that matter. And hey, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and tell me your city or country. I'll do my best to say hello to everyone. Whether you're in New York, London, Mumbai, or a small town I've never heard of, you're part of this family now. So please, take a moment to let me know where you are. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Now, grab a cup of coffee, settle in, because what happened to me, it changed everything I thought I knew about family, love, and loyalty. Let me paint you a picture of how this all began. 35 years ago, I held my daughter Sarah in my arms for the first time. She was this tiny, perfect little human being, with the most beautiful blue eyes I'd ever seen. My wife Margaret and I, we looked at each other and knew our lives had just found their true purpose. Margaret was everything to me, my high school sweetheart, my best friend, my anchor. We'd married young, barely 22, with nothing but dreams and an unshakable faith in each other. When Sarah came along, our little family felt complete. We weren't rich, not by any stretch, but we were rich in the things that truly mattered: love, laughter, and an unbreakable bond. I worked 2 jobs back then. During the day, I was a construction worker, building houses for other families while dreaming of the day I could build something bigger for mine. At night, I stocked shelves at the local grocery store. My hands were always rough, my back always ached, but every blister, every sore muscle was worth it when I saw Sarah's face light up when I came home. Margaret worked as a seamstress from home, taking in alterations and custom orders. I can still picture her, sitting by the window with Sarah on her lap, teaching our daughter how to thread a needle while humming old lullabies. Those were golden days, friends. Days when our biggest worry was whether we'd have enough money for Sarah's ballet classes or if we could afford the nicer shoes she wanted for school. Sarah was everything we'd hoped for in a child and more. She was kind, intelligent, curious about the world. She'd ask me 1,000 questions every day. Daddy, why is the sky blue? Daddy, where do flowers come from? Daddy, will you love me forever? And to that last question, I'd always give the same answer: forever and always, sweetheart. Forever and always. She excelled in school, not just academically but socially. Teachers would tell us how Sarah was the first to help a classmate who was struggling, how she'd share her lunch with kids who forgot theirs. She had this natural empathy, this beautiful heart that seemed to care about everyone around her. As she grew older, Sarah developed a passion for art. She'd spend hours drawing, painting, creating these incredible pieces that showed a depth of emotion I didn't even know children could possess. Margaret and I, we'd hang every single drawing on our refrigerator, on the walls, anywhere we could find space. Our house looked like an art gallery, and we couldn't have been prouder. When Sarah turned 16, she came to us with tears in her eyes. We thought something was wrong, but then she hugged us both and said, "I just realized how lucky I am. My friends complain about their parents all the time, but I hit the jackpot with you too." That moment, that pure expression of gratitude and love, it's burned into my memory forever. High school brought new challenges, but Sarah navigated them with grace. She was accepted into the National Honor Society, won several art competitions, and maintained friendships that seemed to be built on genuine care and mutual respect. She was the daughter every parent dreams of having. But it was also during high school that Sarah met him. Marcus Thompson. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs I missed, the red flags I ignored because I trusted my daughter's judgment so completely. Marcus was different. Not necessarily in a bad way, at least not at first. He was charming, I'll give him that. Smooth talker, well-dressed, came from what people would call a good family. His father owned a small chain of car dealerships, and Marcus carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never really wanted for anything. When Sarah first brought him home for dinner, I tried to keep an open mind. After all, my little girl was 18, practically an adult, and she deserved the chance to make her own choices about relationships. Margaret and I had raised her with good values, I trusted those values to guide her. But there was something about Marcus that didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the way he looked around our modest home, his eyes taking in our second-hand furniture, our faded wallpaper, our lived-in comfort with what seemed like barely concealed judgment. Or maybe it was how he talked about his plans, his future, always using words like upgrade and move up in the world, as if where you came from determined your worth as a person. "Mr. Henderson," he said to me that first night, cutting into the pot roast Margaret had spent all afternoon preparing, "Sarah tells me you work construction. That must be challenging." The pause before challenging spoke volumes. This kid, and that's what he was, just a kid with an inflated sense of his own importance, was already looking down on the work that had put food on our table and clothes on Sarah's back for 18 years. "Honest work is never challenging in the way that matters," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "It builds character, provides for family, contributes something real to the world." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course. I just meant that Sarah deserves someone who can offer her more opportunities, you know. Someone who can match her potential." Sarah squeezed his hand and shot me an apologetic look. "Dad, Marcus doesn't mean anything by it. He's just ambitious." Margaret, bless her heart, tried to steer the conversation toward safer ground. "Marcus, Sarah tells us you're studying business at the community college. What are your plans after graduation?" "Actually, Mrs. Henderson, I'm transferring to State University next semester. My father thinks I should get a proper business education before I take over the family dealerships. Sarah and I have been talking about her coming with me." This was the first I'd heard of such a plan. I looked at Sarah, searching her face for some sign of how she felt about this, but she was staring at her plate, suddenly very interested in her mashed potatoes. "Sarah's got a full scholarship to the art program here," I said carefully. "She's worked incredibly hard for that opportunity." "Oh, art," Marcus waved his hand dismissively. "That's a nice hobby, but it's not really a career, is it? I mean, unless you're Picasso or something." Sarah's smart enough to understand that she needs to be practical about her future. I felt Margaret's hand touch my arm under the table, a gentle reminder to stay calm. But something in Marcus's tone, the casual way he dismissed our daughter's passion and talent, made my blood pressure spike. "Art has been Sarah's dream since she was 5 years old," I said, my voice a little firmer than before. "She's incredibly talented. Her teachers think she has real professional potential." Marcus laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that makes your skin crawl. Condescending, dismissive, cruel. "With all due respect, Mr. Henderson, teachers say that to every student. It's like participation trophies, everyone gets told they're special. But the real world doesn't work that way. The real world rewards people who make smart, practical choices." Sarah finally looked up, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before. It wasn't quite shame, but it was close. She was embarrassed, of us, of our home, of the life we built together with so much love and sacrifice. "Maybe we should change the subject," she said softly. The rest of the dinner passed in uncomfortable politeness, but the damage was done. After Marcus left that night, I tried to talk to Sarah about my concerns, but she shut me down immediately. "Dad, I love you, but you don't understand. Marcus sees potential in me that goes beyond this small town, beyond." She gestured around our living room, at the family photos, at the life we'd built. "Beyond all of this. What's wrong with all of this? I asked, genuinely hurt. Haven't we given you a good life? Haven't we loved you, supported you, encouraged your dreams? Of course you have, Sarah said quickly, but her voice lacked its usual warmth. But there's a whole world out there, Dad. Opportunities you and Mom never had. Marcus can show me that world. Margaret joined us then, settling into her favorite chair with a cup of tea. Honey, she said to Sarah, we've always supported your dreams. If you want to go to State University, if that's truly what you want, your father and I will find a way to make it work financially. But make sure it's your dream you're chasing, not someone else's idea of what your dreams should be. Sarah's face flushed. You think I can't make my own decisions? You think I'm some naive little girl who can't see when someone is trying to manipulate me? That's not what your mother said, I interjected, but Sarah was already standing up, heading for the stairs. Maybe Marcus is right, she said, pausing at the bottom step. Maybe I do need to think bigger, want more from life. Maybe I've been settling for less because I didn't know there were other options. Those words hit like a physical blow. Settling for less. As if the love Margaret and I had poured into raising her, the sacrifices we'd made, the values we tried to instill, as if all of that was somehow insufficient, somehow small and unworthy. That night, as Margaret and I lay in bed, she cried quietly into her pillow. What did we do wrong, John? She whispered. How did we fail her? We didn't fail her, I said, but even as I spoke the words, doubt crept in. Had we been too protective? Had we not pushed her hard enough to dream bigger? Had our contentment with our simple, honest life somehow limited her vision of what was possible? The questions kept me awake long into the night, and they would haunt me for months to come. Over the following weeks, Sarah's behavior changed dramatically. She became secretive, spending more and more time with Marcus and less time with us. She started criticizing things that had never bothered her before. Our car was too old, our house was too small, our dreams were too modest. One afternoon, I found her on the phone with someone, speaking in hushed tones. When she saw me, she quickly ended the call. Who was that? I asked. Just a friend, she said, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. Sarah, what's going on? You've been different lately, and your mother and I are worried. She sighed, the kind of dramatic sigh teenagers perfect when they think their parents are being unreasonable. Nothing's going on, Dad. I'm just growing up. I'm starting to see things differently, want different things. What kind of different things? She was quiet for a long moment, then looked at me with eyes that seemed older than her 18 years. I want a life where I don't have to worry about money all the time. Where I can travel, experience culture, meet interesting people. Where I don't have to clip coupons or buy generic brand groceries or wonder if we can afford for me to go to college. Her words stung because they weren't entirely wrong. We had struggled financially. We had made sacrifices. But I'd always thought we'd done a good job of shielding her from the worst of it, of showing her that love and family could fill the gaps that money couldn't. Money isn't everything, sweetheart, I said gently. Your mother and I have been happy together for over 20 years, and we've never been wealthy. We've had something much more valuable, we've had each other. Sarah's expression softened for just a moment, and I saw a flicker of the little girl who used to crawl into my lap for bedtime stories. But then it hardened again, and Marcus's influence was written all over her face. But it could be both, she said. Love and security. Love and opportunity. Why should I have to choose? I wanted to tell her that life rarely offers both in equal measure, that the people who seem to have everything often sacrifice things she couldn't see or understand. But she was 18, convinced she knew how the world worked, and nothing I could say would change her mind. 3 weeks later, she announced she was transferring to State University with Marcus. The day Sarah left for State University, Margaret cried for 3 hours straight. I held her on our front porch, watching Marcus load Sarah's belongings into his shiny new SUV, a graduation gift from his parents. Our daughter hugged us goodbye, but it felt different. Perfunctory. Like she was going through the motions because it was expected, not because she wanted to. I'll call you every week, she promised, but there was something hollow in her voice. And we'll drive up to visit once you're settled, Margaret said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Sarah's smile faltered slightly. Maybe wait a few weeks. Let me get adjusted to college life first. Marcus honked the horn impatiently. We need to get on the road, babe. Traffic's going to be murder. And just like that, our little girl was gone. The first few weeks, Sarah did call. Not every week like she'd promised, but regularly enough that we could tell ourselves everything was fine. She talked about her classes, her new dorm room, the friends she was making. But there was a distance in her voice, a formality that hadn't been there before. How's your art? Margaret would always ask. Oh, I'm taking a break from that, Sarah would reply. Marcus thinks I should focus on more practical subjects. I'm taking business classes now, and psychology. Things that will actually help me in the real world. Each conversation felt like losing her a little bit more. When we finally drove up to visit her in October, about 2 months after she'd left, the change was shocking. Sarah met us in the parking lot of her dormitory, and she looked like a completely different person. Her hair was styled differently, more sophisticated. She was wearing clothes that I knew we hadn't bought her, expensive-looking things that probably cost more than Margaret made in a month. You look beautiful, sweetheart, Margaret said, hugging her close. Thanks, Mom. Marcus has been helping me develop a more mature style. We went to lunch at a restaurant that Marcus chose, an upscale place where the cheapest entree cost $30. I watched the prices on the menu and tried to calculate how much this meal was going to cost, knowing that Marcus expected me to pay since I'd invited everyone. This place is nice, Margaret said diplomatically. Marcus brings me here all the time, Sarah said. His father has an account here. Mr. Thompson knows the owner. Marcus launched into a story about some business deal his father was working on, speaking in terms I didn't fully understand but that were clearly meant to impress. Sarah hung on his every word, laughing at jokes that weren't particularly funny, nodding along with opinions that didn't sound like her own. What about your art classes? I asked during a lull in Marcus's monologue. Are you planning to get back into that next semester? Sarah glanced at Marcus before answering. Actually, Dad, I've been thinking about that a lot, and I've decided that art is better as a hobby. Marcus has shown me how limiting it would be as a career choice. I mean, look at the statistics, most artists never make a living wage. But you're talented, Margaret protested. Your high school teacher said. High school teachers don't know anything about the real world, Marcus interrupted with that same condescending laugh that had grated on me from day one. Sarah's smart enough to recognize that talent isn't enough. You need connections, marketing skills, business acumen. Things that are much easier to develop in other fields. I wanted to point out that Sarah had never expressed any interest in business or marketing before meeting him. I wanted to remind her of the hours she'd spent in her room as a child, drawing and painting with a focus and passion that was rare in someone so young. But looking at her face, I could see that she'd already made up her mind, and nothing I said would change it. The rest of the visit was strained. We tried to maintain normal conversation, but everything felt forced. Sarah seemed embarrassed by us, by Margaret's simple questions about her classes and friends, by my inability to follow Marcus's business jargon, by our obvious discomfort in the expensive restaurant and upscale shops Marcus insisted on showing us. When it was time to leave, Sarah hugged us both, but even her embraces felt different. Shorter. Less genuine. Drive safely, she said. And don't worry about me. I'm doing great here. As we drove home, Margaret was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. She's not happy, John. Did you see it? Behind all that new sophistication, she looked empty. I had seen it. There was something missing from Sarah's eyes, some spark that had always been there but was now dimmed. But she was an adult, making her own choices. All we could do was love her and hope she'd find her way back to herself. The phone calls became less frequent after that visit. Weeks would go by without hearing from her, and when we did call, she was always busy, always rushing off to some event or study group or date with Marcus. Christmas that year was heartbreaking. Sarah came home for exactly 3 days, and she spent most of that time texting or taking phone calls from Marcus. She seemed impatient with our family traditions, critical of everything from Margaret's cooking to our choice of television shows. "This is so boring," she said on Christmas morning, after we opened presents. "Marcus's family is spending Christmas in Aspen. They invited me, but I felt like I should come home." The way she said it, like she was doing us a favor, like being with us was a chore she had to endure, it cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. But the worst moment came when Margaret gave Sarah her Christmas present. She'd been working on it for months, a beautiful handmade quilt featuring fabric from Sarah's old art smocks, pieces from her childhood dresses, scraps from projects they'd worked on together over the years. It was a masterpiece of love and memory, every stitch a testament to 18 years of devotion. Sarah unwrapped it, looked at it for about 10 seconds, and said, "Oh. Thanks, Mom. It's rustic. Rustic." As if Margaret's countless hours of careful, loving work were just some primitive craft project. Margaret's face crumpled, but she tried to smile. "I thought you might like having something that reminded you of home when you're at school." "Yeah, maybe I can use it as a bedspread in my dorm," Sarah said absently, already looking at her phone again. That night, I found Margaret in our bedroom, holding the quilt and crying. "20 years, she whispered. 20 years I've been saving fabric scraps, thinking about this quilt. I wanted it to tell the story of her childhood, of our love for her. And she called it rustic." I held my wife while she sobbed, and I made a decision that night. I was going to fight for my daughter. I was going to find a way to show her what she was throwing away, what she was turning her back on. But I had no idea how far Marcus's influence had already spread, or how much deeper his claws were buried in her heart. Spring semester brought news that shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow still did. Sarah called on a Tuesday evening in February, her voice bright with artificial excitement. "Dad, I have amazing news. Marcus proposed." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, gesturing for Margaret to come listen. "Proposed?" I managed to say. "Sarah, honey, you're only 19. Don't you think? Don't you think I'm old enough to make my own decisions?" she interrupted, and there was an edge to her voice I'd never heard before. "Marcus and I love each other. We're perfect together. His family adores me." Margaret took the phone. "Sweetheart, we're happy if you're happy. But marriage is a big step. Maybe you could have a long engagement, give yourselves time to. Why can't you just be excited for me?" Sarah's voice cracked with frustration. "This is supposed to be one of the happiest moments of my life, and you're already trying to talk me out of it." "We're not trying to talk you out of anything," I said, taking the phone back. "We just want to make sure you've thought this through. You've known Marcus for less than a year. I've known him long enough to know he's everything I want in a husband. He's ambitious, he's successful, he treats me like a queen. He wants to give me the kind of life you and Mom never could." There it was again, that comparison, that judgment of our life, our love, our sacrifices. Each time she said something like that, it felt like she was erasing 18 years of bedtime stories, family dinners, scraped knees kissed better, dreams shared and fears soothed. "Money isn't everything, Sarah," I said quietly. "Easy to say when you've never had to worry about whether there'll be enough left over after bills to buy decent clothes or go to a movie," she shot back. "Marcus understands that I deserve better than constantly counting pennies." The accusation stung because there was truth in it. We had struggled financially. There had been times when Margaret and I lay awake at night, figuring out how to stretch the grocery money, how to afford Sarah's school supplies, whether we could manage the payment for her senior class trip. But we'd always managed. We always found a way. And more importantly, we'd never let money define our worth or our happiness. "When's the wedding?" Margaret asked, her voice carefully neutral. "This summer. July 15th. Marcus doesn't want a long engagement. He says when you know something is right, there's no point in waiting." July. "Sarah, that's only 5 months away. Wouldn't you like more time to plan?" Marcus's mom is handling most of the planning. She's hired a wedding coordinator and everything. It's going to be beautiful, at the country club, with a band and flowers and all the things I've dreamed of. I noticed she didn't mention us having any role in the planning. Traditionally, the bride's family handles the wedding arrangements, but apparently, that was another tradition that didn't apply when your family wasn't wealthy enough to matter. "We'd love to help however we can," Margaret offered. There was a pause, and I could almost hear Sarah calculating how much our help would be worth versus how much it might embarrass her. "That's sweet, Mom, but Mrs. Thompson has it all under control. She knows all the best vendors and venues. She's been planning society events for years." Society events. Our daughter was marrying into what she considered high society, and we were clearly not part of that world. "What about your dress?" Margaret asked. "I was hoping we could go shopping together." Another pause. "Actually, Mrs. Thompson already found the perfect dress. It's a designer original, Oscar de la Renta. It cost more than." She trailed off, perhaps realizing she was about to tell us the dress cost more than we made in several months. "Well," Margaret said with forced cheer, "I'm sure it's beautiful." "It is. I'll send you pictures." After she hung up, Margaret and I sat in our kitchen, staring at each other. The wedding was going to happen whether we approved or not. Our daughter was slipping away from us, becoming someone we barely recognized, and there seemed to be nothing we could do to stop it. Over the next few weeks, we tried to stay involved in the wedding planning, but it became clear that our input wasn't wanted or needed. When Margaret suggested some family traditions she'd hoped to incorporate, Sarah dismissed them as old-fashioned. When I offered to help with costs, I was told that Marcus's family prefers to handle the financial arrangements. The only thing we were allowed to contribute was the guest list, and even that became a source of tension. "I can invite 40 people from your side," Sarah informed us during one of her rare phone calls. "Mrs. Thompson says more than that would unbalance the seating arrangements." 40 people. To represent 18 years of our life with Sarah, 18 years of family friends, neighbors who'd watched her grow up, teachers who'd nurtured her talents, family members who'd loved her since birth. "What about your Aunt Linda?" Margaret asked. "She's been so excited about the wedding. And your art teacher from high school, Mrs. Patterson, she's asked about it several times." "Mom, you don't understand. This is going to be an elegant event. These people, they wouldn't fit in. They'd be uncomfortable, and honestly, it would be embarrassing." Embarrassing. Our family and friends, the people who'd shaped and supported our daughter for her entire life, were now a source of embarrassment. I thought about Mrs. Patterson, who'd stayed after school countless hours to work with Sarah on her art projects, who'd written recommendation letters and entered Sarah's work in competitions. I thought about Aunt Linda, who'd never missed a birthday or Christmas, who'd helped us financially during the lean years without ever making us feel ashamed. "Sarah," I said carefully, "these people love you. They've been part of your life since." "That was before I knew there was something better," she interrupted. "Marcus's friends are successful, cultured people. Doctors, lawyers, business owners. People who can actually help us as we build our life together. Help us." Everything had become transactional in her new world. Relationships were valuable based on what they could provide, not on the depth of caring or the history of love. The guest list argument continued for weeks, but in the end, we were allowed to invite exactly the number of people Mrs. Thompson deemed appropriate. Everyone else, lifelong friends, beloved relatives, the community that had watched Sarah grow up, they weren't important enough for her new life. 3 months before the wedding, Sarah came home for a weekend to finalize some details. She arrived in Marcus's BMW, wearing clothes that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. She looked beautiful, polished, sophisticated, and completely foreign. During dinner, she told us about her new life with a kind of manic enthusiasm that felt forced. Marcus's father is grooming him to take over the business, she said, cutting her food with precise, delicate motions that made me wonder when she'd learn to eat like that. And Marcus has such amazing plans for expansion. We're already looking at houses, not just any houses, but really special places in the best neighborhoods. What about finishing college? Margaret asked. Sarah waved her hand dismissively. College is just a piece of paper. Marcus says I'm already getting a better education in real life, learning how to be the wife of a successful businessman. There are social obligations, charity work, networking events. It's a full-time job in itself. I listened to her describe this life she was planning, and it sounded like she was talking about becoming an accessory rather than a partner. Where was the girl who dreamed of creating art that would move people's hearts? Where was the young woman who'd once told me that success meant making a positive difference in the world? You sound like you're planning to give up all your own dreams, I said gently. Sarah's face hardened. My dreams have evolved, Dad. They've gotten bigger, more realistic. Not everyone can afford to chase impractical fantasies. Your art wasn't a fantasy. You had real talent. Had, she emphasized. Past tense. I've moved on to more important things. That night, I tried one more time to reach her. I found her in her old room, looking through some things she wanted to take back to school. Sarah, can we talk? Really talk, just you and me? She sighed but sat down on her bed. What is it, Dad? I'm worried about you. This isn't the life you talked about when you were growing up. This isn't the person you wanted to become. People change, Dad. They grow up. They realize that childhood dreams aren't always practical adult goals. But you're not happy, I said quietly. I can see it in your eyes. You're trying so hard to be someone you're not that you're losing sight of who you really are. For just a moment, her careful composure cracked, and I saw a flash of uncertainty, maybe even pain. But then she stood up, and the mask was back in place. I'm happier than I've ever been, she said firmly. I'm sorry if that threatens you, but I'm not going to apologize for wanting more from life than this. She gestured around her childhood room, at the art supplies still scattered on her desk, at the dreams we'd helped her nurture for so many years. What if Marcus isn't who you think he is? I asked desperately. What if he's just telling you what you want to hear to control you? Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. How dare you? Marcus loves me. He wants to give me everything you never could. And you're so jealous, so bitter about your own failed dreams, that you can't stand to see me succeed. Her words hit like physical blows. Failed dreams. As if the life Margaret and I had built together, the love we'd shared, the family we'd created, was somehow a failure because it wasn't wealthy or prestigious. I love you, I said simply. That's all this is about. I love you, and I'm scared you're making a mistake that will cost you your happiness. Then trust me to make my own mistakes, she said coldly. And stop trying to sabotage the best thing that's ever happened to me. She left the next morning without saying goodbye. July 15th dawned perfect, sunny, warm, with just enough breeze to keep everyone comfortable. The Willowbrook Country Club looked like something out of a magazine, all white linens and crystal glasses and flowers that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Margaret and I arrived early, dressed in the best clothes we owned. Margaret had bought a new dress for the occasion, navy blue with a modest neckline and sleeves that covered her arms. She looked beautiful, elegant in her own understated way. But I could see her nervousness as we walked through the pristine grounds, taking in the obvious wealth and sophistication surrounding us. "We don't belong here," she whispered to me as we watched the florists make final adjustments to the elaborate arrangements. "We belong wherever our daughter is," I replied, but even I felt intimidated by the grandeur of it all. The other guests began arriving, Marcus's family and friends, all of them looking like they'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. The women wore designer dresses and jewelry that caught the sunlight, the men moved with the confident ease of people who'd never had to worry about money. They spoke in voices that carried the authority of education and privilege, discussing vacations in Europe, investment strategies, social events we'd never heard of. Our 40 guests looked as out of place as we felt. Aunt Linda, bless her heart, had worn her best dress, the one she bought for her own daughter's wedding 10 years ago. My brother Tom and his wife showed up in their church clothes, looking around with the same wide-eyed wonder we felt. Sarah's high school friends, the few who'd been invited, clustered together near the back, clearly uncomfortable in the upscale surroundings. But it was when I saw Mrs. Patterson that my heart really broke. Sarah's old art teacher had driven 3 hours to be here, wearing a dress that was probably older than Sarah herself but pressed and clean and worn with dignity. She'd brought a small gift, something she'd obviously wrapped herself with care, and she kept looking around with such hope in her eyes, waiting for Sarah to acknowledge her, to remember the hours they'd spent together nurturing something beautiful and meaningful. The ceremony itself was flawless in every superficial way. Sarah looked stunning in her designer dress, walking down the aisle to music performed by a string quartet. The flowers were breathtaking, the setting was picture perfect, and every detail had been executed with the kind of precision that only significant money could buy. But as I watched my daughter walk toward her future husband, all I could think about was how different this was from the wedding she'd dreamed about as a little girl. She used to plan her wedding while playing dress-up, talking about dancing with her daddy and having all her friends there and making sure everyone felt loved and included. This wasn't that wedding. This was Marcus's mother's wedding, executed according to social expectations and business relationships rather than love and family bonds. When the officiant asked who gave Sarah to be married, I stood up as tradition required and said, "Her mother and I do." But the words felt hollow in my mouth. We weren't giving her away, she'd already left us long ago. Sarah and Marcus exchanged vows they'd written themselves, but even those felt rehearsed, calculated. She promised to support his ambitions, to be the partner he deserved in building their successful life together. He promised to give her everything she'd ever dreamed of, to elevate her to the level of sophistication and prosperity she was meant for. Nothing about love. Nothing about partnership in the truest sense. Nothing about growing together, supporting each other through hardships, building something meaningful that would last. During the reception, Margaret and I tried our best to mingle, but the divide between our world and this one became increasingly obvious. When people asked what I did for work, I watched their interest visibly diminish when I mentioned construction. When Margaret tried to make conversation about Sarah's childhood, she was met with polite but empty smiles. The worst moment came during the father-daughter dance. It should have been one of the most precious moments of my life, holding my little girl one last time before she officially became someone else's family. But as we moved slowly to the music, Sarah felt stiff in my arms, distant. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I said, trying to find some connection with the daughter I remembered. "Thank you," she replied formally, like she was talking to a stranger. "I love you, Sarah. No matter what happens, no matter how our relationship changes, I want you to know that I love you and I'm proud of you." She was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know you think I'm making a mistake," she said. "But I'm not the same person I was in high school, Dad. I want different things now. Better things. I just want you to be happy," I said. "I am happy," she insisted, but there was something brittle in her voice. "Happier than I've ever been." The song ended, and she stepped away from me with what looked like relief. Marcus immediately swept her onto the dance floor for the next song, spinning her around while she laughed in a way that seemed performed for the watching crowd. As the evening progressed, I noticed that none of our family friends had been invited to stay for the full reception. They'd been seated at tables in the back during dinner, served a different meal from the premium guests, and then quietly excluded from the dancing and late-night celebration. By 10 o'clock, most of them had left, understanding without being told that they weren't really part of this new chapter in Sarah's life. Mrs. Patterson approached me before she left, tears in her eyes. "I kept hoping she'd come talk to me," she said quietly. "I brought her something, a small piece I've been working on, inspired by one of her paintings from senior year. But I don't think she even knows I'm here." I looked across the room and saw Sarah surrounded by Marcus's friends, laughing and chatting, completely absorbed in her new social circle. She hadn't spoken to any of our guests except for the briefest pleasantries during the receiving line. "She knows," I said to Mrs. Patterson, though I wasn't sure that was true. "She's just overwhelmed by everything." Mrs. Patterson nodded, but we both knew it was more than that. Sarah had made a choice about which life mattered to her, and it didn't include the people who'd loved and nurtured her before Marcus came along. Margaret and I left around midnight, driving home in heavy silence. The contrast between the wedding we'd just attended and the daughter we'd raised was so stark it felt surreal. "Did you see how she looked at us during the toasts?" Margaret finally said. "Like she was embarrassed that we were even there." I had seen it. When Marcus's father gave his speech about welcoming Sarah into their family, about how she was exactly the kind of woman they'd hoped their son would find, someone worthy of their success and social standing, Sarah had glowed with pride. But when my brother Tom stood up to share a few memories of Sarah as a child, she'd looked uncomfortable, almost ashamed of the simple, heartfelt stories he told about family camping trips and birthday parties and the kind of ordinary, loving moments that actually make up a life. "Maybe we did something wrong," Margaret said as we pulled into our driveway. "Maybe we didn't prepare her for the real world, didn't teach her to want more from life. We taught her to value what matters," I said firmly. "Love, loyalty, integrity, kindness. If she's forgotten those things, it's not because we failed as parents." But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at me. Had we been too content with our simple life? Had we somehow limited her vision of what was possible? Had our satisfaction with love and family made her think those things weren't enough? The questions haunted me through the night and into the days that followed. Sarah left for her honeymoon without saying goodbye, and when she returned, the distance between us seemed to have grown even wider. The first year of Sarah's marriage was like watching someone I loved disappear one piece at a time. The changes weren't dramatic or sudden, they were gradual, insidious, like erosion wearing away at a riverbank until suddenly you realize the landscape has completely altered. At first, Sarah still called occasionally, though our conversations became increasingly superficial. She'd tell us about the house she and Marcus had bought, a McMansion in an exclusive subdivision with more bathrooms than our entire house had rooms. She'd mention charity events she was planning, social obligations she had to fulfill, the importance of maintaining appearances in Marcus's business circles. "You should see the house, Dad," she said during one of these calls. "It has a 3-car garage, a marble foyer, and the most amazing kitchen with professional-grade appliances. Marcus says it's important to have a home that reflects your success." "It sounds impressive," I said, though something about the way she described it felt hollow. She talked about the house like she was reading from a real estate brochure, not describing the home where she planned to build a life. "Maybe you and Mom could come visit soon," she added, but it sounded more like a polite offer than a genuine invitation. "We'd love that," Margaret said, taking the phone. "When would be good for you?" There was a pause, and I could almost hear Sarah calculating. "Well, things are pretty busy right now. Marcus is launching a new expansion of the dealership, and I'm organizing this fundraiser for the hospital auxiliary. Maybe in a few months when things settle down." But months passed, and the invitation never materialized. Instead, we got updates through social media, photos of Sarah at elegant dinner parties, charity galas, business events. In every picture, she looked beautiful and sophisticated, but there was something in her smile that didn't reach her eyes. The Sarah who had once spent hours drawing fantastical creatures and painting landscapes that seemed to glow with inner light had been replaced by someone who posted carefully curated images of designer handbags, expensive meals, and social gatherings where everyone looked affluent and important but not particularly happy. Margaret created a photo album of these pictures, trying to stay connected to our daughter's life through these glimpses of her new world. But looking through it was heartbreaking. It was like watching someone perform a role they'd been assigned rather than live a life they'd chosen. About 18 months into the marriage, the calls stopped coming regularly. Weeks would pass without hearing from Sarah, and when we tried to reach her, she was always busy, always rushing off to some commitment or obligation. "I'm sorry I haven't called," she'd say. "You have no idea how demanding this life is. There are so many expectations, so many people to keep happy." When I suggested that maybe she could simplify things, focus on what truly mattered to her, she actually laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Dad, you don't understand how the real world works. When your husband is a successful businessman, there are standards you have to maintain. Appearances matter. Relationships matter. Everything you do reflects on his career. What about your own interests?" Margaret asked during one of these conversations. "What about things that make you happy?" "I am happy," Sarah insisted, but it sounded more like she was trying to convince herself than us. "I have a beautiful home, financial security, a position in the community. What more could I want? What more could she want? How about purpose, passion, creativity, genuine connection? How about the joy she used to find in simple things like watching a sunset or helping a neighbor or creating something beautiful with her own hands?" But those questions seemed meaningless in her new world, where value was measured in dollars and social status rather than love and fulfillment. The breaking point came during Christmas of their second year of marriage. Sarah had spent the previous Christmas with Marcus's family in some resort in Colorado, so we'd been looking forward to having her home for the holidays. She agreed to come, but only for Christmas Day itself, and only for a few hours in the afternoon. When she arrived, the change was shocking. She'd always been slender, but now she was too thin, her cheekbones sharp in a way that spoke of stress rather than health. Her hair was perfectly styled, her clothes were obviously expensive, and her makeup was flawless, but something essential was missing from her face. She brought expensive gifts, a cashmere scarf for Margaret, a leather wallet for me that probably cost more than I made in a week. But they felt impersonal, like things she'd had an assistant pick out rather than gifts chosen with thought and love. "These are too expensive, sweetheart," Margaret said, fingering the impossibly soft cashmere. "Marcus says it's important to give quality gifts," Sarah replied. "People judge you by the presents you choose. People judge you." When had gift-giving become about judgment rather than expression of love? Margaret's gift to Sarah was another handmade item, a set of kitchen towels she'd embroidered with flowers and Sarah's new monogram. Simple, practical, made with hours of loving work. Sarah opened the package, looked at the towels for about 5 seconds, and said, "Oh. Thanks, Mom. They're sweet. Sweet." The same dismissive tone she'd used for the quilt 2 years earlier. "I made them myself," Margaret said softly. "I thought you might like having something handmade in your new house." "Of course," Sarah said quickly, perhaps sensing the hurt in her mother's voice. "They'll be perfect for something." We tried to have a normal Christmas dinner, but conversation was stilted and uncomfortable. Sarah checked her phone constantly, apologizing each time but never putting it away. She picked at her food, the same recipes she'd loved growing up, and made comments about how rich everything was, how she was watching her figure for some upcoming social event. "Marcus's business partner is hosting a New Year's party," she explained. "Very exclusive. The kind of event where you want to make sure you look perfect." "You always look perfect to us," I said, and for just a moment, her careful composure seemed to waver. "That's different," she said quietly. "You're my parents. You have to think that." The sadness in her voice was unmistakable, but before I could respond, her phone rang. "Marcus, checking on when she'd be home. "I should probably head back soon," she said after the call. "We're having dinner with the Thompsons tonight, and I still need to get ready." She'd been at our house for exactly 2.5 hours. As she gathered her things to leave, I made one last attempt to connect with the daughter I remembered. "Sarah, are you really happy? I mean truly, deeply happy with the life you're building?" She stopped moving, her back to me, and for a long moment she didn't respond. When she finally turned around, her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. "Happiness is a luxury I can't afford right now," she said. "I have responsibilities, obligations. Marcus depends on me to be the wife he needs, the partner his business requires. That's more important than my personal feelings." "That's not how marriage is supposed to work," Margaret said gently. "Partnership means supporting each other's happiness, not sacrificing yourself for someone else's success." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Maybe that's how it worked in your generation, but the world is different now. More complicated. There are bigger stakes." She hugged us both goodbye, but even her embraces felt perfunctory, obligatory. As I watched her drive away in her luxury car, heading back to her mansion and her important dinner plans, I felt like I was watching a stranger who happened to share my daughter's face. That night, Margaret and I barely spoke. We were losing Sarah, and there seemed to be nothing we could do to stop it. Worse, I was beginning to suspect that she was losing herself too, becoming so consumed with playing the role Marcus expected that she'd forgotten who she really was underneath all the expensive clothes and social obligations. But what we didn't know, what we couldn't have imagined, was that the worst was yet to come. 3 years into Sarah's marriage, our worst fears became reality in a way that was more devastating than anything we could have imagined. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday evening in March. Margaret was in the kitchen making dinner, and I was reading the newspaper when the phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah's number, which had become increasingly rare, so I answered quickly. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you?" But it wasn't Sarah's voice that responded. It was Marcus, and his tone was cold, businesslike. "John, we need to talk." Something in his voice made my blood run cold. "Is Sarah all right? Has something happened?" "Sarah's fine. But there's a situation we need to discuss, and I think it's better if we handle this in person. Can you and Margaret come to our house this weekend?" "What kind of situation?" I pressed. "Marcus, you're scaring me. It's about some financial irregularities that have come to light. Issues that could potentially affect my business reputation if they're not handled properly." Financial irregularities. I had no idea what he was talking about, but the formal, almost threatening tone of his voice made me agree to the meeting. Margaret and I spent the rest of the week in a state of anxious confusion, trying to imagine what Marcus might be referring to. We'd never had any financial dealings with him or his business. We'd never borrowed money from them or asked for any kind of financial support. What could possibly have gone wrong? Saturday afternoon, we drove to their house, the sprawling McMansion that Sarah had described but we'd never been invited to see. It was everything she'd said and more, imposing, expensive, designed to impress rather than welcome. Even the driveway was intimidating, a circular drive lined with perfectly manicured landscaping that probably required a full-time gardener to maintain. Sarah met us at the door, but she looked terrible. Her face was pale, her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying, and her usually perfect appearance was disheveled. She barely made eye contact as she led us into a formal living room that looked like a furniture showroom, beautiful but completely lacking in warmth or personality. Marcus was waiting for us, dressed in an expensive suit even though it was Saturday afternoon. He didn't get up when we entered, didn't offer his hand or any of the basic courtesies you'd extend to your in-laws. Instead, he gestured to chairs across from him like we were employees being called into the boss's office. "Thank you for coming," he said, though his tone suggested anything but gratitude. "This is a difficult conversation, but it needs to happen." Sarah sat beside him, but as far away as the couch would allow. She kept her hands folded in her lap and stared at the floor. Marcus, I said, I don't understand what this is about. What financial irregularities are you referring to? He leaned forward, his expression stern and accusatory. It's come to my attention that you and Margaret have been taking advantage of Sarah's generous nature. Manipulating her emotions to extract money from our household. The accusation was so unexpected, so completely unfounded, that for a moment I couldn't even respond. Margaret gasped audibly beside me. What are you talking about? I finally managed to say. We've never asked Sarah for money. We've never taken a penny from her. That's not what the evidence suggests, Marcus replied, pulling out a manila folder. I've been reviewing our financial records, and there are numerous unexplained withdrawals from Sarah's account. Withdrawals that correspond directly with phone calls and visits from you. He began laying out bank statements on the coffee table, pointing to highlighted entries. $500 here, $300 there, $200 the week after you visited last Christmas. It adds up to several $1,000s over the past 2 years. I stared at the statements in complete confusion. I don't understand. We never. Sarah, Margaret said, her voice breaking. Tell him. Tell him we've never asked you for money. For the first time since we'd arrived, Sarah looked up. But instead of the defense we expected, instead of setting the record straight, she spoke in a voice so quiet we could barely hear her. You said it was just temporary, she whispered. You said you'd pay it back. The world seemed to tilt sideways. My own daughter was sitting there, backing up a lie that could destroy us, supporting an accusation that she knew was completely false. Sarah, what are you saying? I stood up, my heart pounding. We never asked you for money. We never borrowed anything from you. You know that's not true. She finally met my eyes, and what I saw there nearly broke me. Fear. She was terrified, but not of us. She was terrified of Marcus. I'm sorry, she said, tears starting to flow. I know you're proud, and I know this is embarrassing, but Marcus found out about the money. I had to tell him. What money? Margaret cried. Sarah, there is no money. We've never taken anything from you. Marcus slammed his hand on the coffee table, making everyone jump. Enough. I have the bank records right here. Are you calling my wife a liar? The trap was perfect, diabolical in its simplicity. Sarah was lying, but she was lying because Marcus had forced her to. He'd manufactured this entire scenario, probably moving money around their accounts to create evidence of withdrawals, then convinced or coerced Sarah to back up his story. But why? What was the point of destroying us like this? I want you to understand the position this puts me in, Marcus continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a rehearsed speech. I'm a prominent businessman in this community. My reputation is everything. The idea that my in-laws have been manipulating my wife, taking advantage of her kind nature to extract money from our household, it's not just embarrassing, it's potentially damaging to my business relationships. And there it was. This wasn't really about money at all. This was about cutting the final ties between Sarah and us. This was Marcus's way of ensuring that we could never again have any influence in Sarah's life, that she would be completely dependent on him and his version of reality. However, he continued, I'm willing to handle this quietly, within the family, provided you agree to certain conditions. What conditions? I asked, though part of me already knew what was coming. First, you repay every penny that was taken. I've calculated the total at $12,400. $12,000. It might as well have been $12 million for all our ability to pay it. We lived paycheck to paycheck, with maybe a few $100s in savings for emergencies. Second, Marcus continued, you agree to limit your contact with Sarah to prevent any future misunderstandings. Perhaps a phone call once a month, visits on major holidays only. I think that's more than reasonable, given the circumstances. And if we don't agree? Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus's smile was cold and calculating. Then I'll have no choice but to pursue this matter through legal channels. Fraud, elder abuse, manipulation of a vulnerable person, these are serious charges. Even if you're not convicted, the legal fees alone would probably bankrupt you. And of course, the story would become public record. Everyone in your small town would know what you'd done to your own daughter. The threat was clear and devastating. He could ruin us financially and socially, destroy our reputation in the community where we'd lived our entire lives. And he could do it all while playing the role of the protective husband defending his wife from her manipulative parents. I looked at Sarah, desperate for some sign that she would tell the truth, that she would stand up for us, that some part of the daughter we'd raised with love and integrity would assert itself. But she sat there in silence, tears streaming down her face, trapped in a web of lies that her husband had spun around all of us. "We need time to think about this," I said finally. "Of course," Marcus replied graciously, as if he was doing us a favor. "Take all the time you need. But I'd appreciate a decision by the end of next week. The longer this situation remains unresolved, the harder it becomes for me to keep it private." The drive home was the longest of my life. Margaret cried quietly in the passenger seat while I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. We didn't speak. What was there to say? Our daughter had betrayed us in the most fundamental way possible, supporting lies that could destroy us rather than standing up for the truth. But even in my anger and heartbreak, I could see that Sarah was as much a victim as we were. Marcus had systematically isolated her from everyone who'd ever loved her, convinced her that her worth depended entirely on his approval, and now he was using her as a weapon against her own parents. The question was, what were we going to do about it? The week following that devastating meeting was the darkest period of my life. Margaret and I walked around our house like ghosts, barely eating, barely sleeping, trying to process what had happened and figure out what to do next. We had 3 choices, and they were all terrible. We could pay the money we didn't have, agree to Marcus's conditions, and accept being cut off from our daughter except for the limited contact he deemed appropriate. This would mean liquidating our small savings, probably taking out loans we couldn't afford, and surrendering any hope of having a real relationship with Sarah. We could refuse his demands and face the legal and social consequences he'd threatened. Even if we eventually proved our innocence, the legal fees would bankrupt us, and the accusations would spread through our small town like wildfire. Everyone we'd known for decades would hear that we'd been accused of stealing from our own daughter. Or we could try to fight back somehow, try to expose Marcus's manipulation and lies. But how do you fight someone who has all the money, all the social connections, and your own daughter supporting his version of events? Margaret barely got out of bed for 3 days. When she did move around the house, she did so mechanically, like someone sleepwalking through her life. I'd find her standing in Sarah's old room, staring at the artwork still hanging on the walls, holding photographs from happier times. "How did we get here, John?" she asked me one evening as we sat in our kitchen, picking at a dinner neither of us wanted to eat. "How did we raise a daughter who could do this to us?" I'd been asking myself the same question, and I kept coming back to the same answer: we hadn't. The daughter we'd raised wouldn't have done this. But that daughter had been systematically destroyed by a man who'd seen her vulnerabilities and exploited them with surgical precision. "She's scared," I said. "Marcus has convinced her that her entire worth, her entire future, depends on keeping him happy. She's so afraid of losing what she thinks she has that she's willing to sacrifice everything else. Including us," Margaret said bitterly. "Including herself," I corrected. "Look at what she's become, Margaret. Look at how she looked in that room, terrified, miserable, trapped. She's lost herself so completely that she doesn't even know who she is anymore." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, then looked at me with eyes that held more pain than I'd ever seen. "She chose him," she said simply. "When it came down to choosing between him and us, between his lies and the truth, she chose him. How do you forgive that? How do you come back from that?" I didn't have an answer. The betrayal cut so deep that some days I could barely breathe when I thought about it. My own daughter, the child I'd loved and nurtured and sacrificed for, had looked me in the eyes and supported lies that could destroy me. But late at night, when Margaret was finally asleep and I sat alone in the darkness, I found myself thinking about the daughter I remembered. The little girl who used to crawl into my lap and ask me to tell her stories. The teenager who'd come to me for advice about everything from boys to college applications. The young woman who'd once told me that I was her hero. That person was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of manipulation and fear and false promises. And if there was any chance of saving her, of saving our family, I had to find a way to reach her. On Thursday evening, 5 days after the confrontation, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to fight back. Not with lawyers or threats or any of the weapons that Marcus would use. I was going to fight with the only thing I had that he didn't, the truth. And I was going to document everything, build a case not for the courts but for Sarah herself, showing her exactly how she'd been manipulated and controlled. I started by going through every conversation we'd had with Sarah over the past 3 years, writing down every change I'd noticed, every red flag I'd ignored, every sign that she was losing herself. I documented the gradual isolation from her friends and family, the abandonment of her artistic dreams, the way she'd adopted Marcus's values and opinions even when they contradicted everything she'd once believed. I researched emotional manipulation and psychological abuse, learning about the techniques that controllers use to isolate and dominate their victims. The patterns were so clear, so textbook, that I wondered how I'd missed them for so long. Margaret joined me in this project once she understood what I was doing. Together, we created a timeline of Sarah's transformation, a detailed record of how a confident, creative, independent young woman had been systematically turned into someone who was afraid to think for herself. But even as we worked, I knew that information alone wouldn't be enough. Marcus had spent 3 years building his web of control around Sarah. He had money, social position, and most importantly, he had convinced Sarah that her identity was entirely tied to being his wife. What I needed was something that would shatter that illusion completely, something that would show Sarah who Marcus really was beneath the charming facade. And then, almost as if the universe was finally ready to deliver justice, I got exactly what I needed. It came from the most unexpected source, Mrs. Patterson, Sarah's old art teacher. She called me on Friday evening, just as Margaret and I were finishing our documentation project. "John," she said, and there was something urgent in her voice. "I need to talk to you about Sarah. Something's happened that I think you need to know about." She asked to meet in person, so we arranged to have coffee the next morning at a diner outside of town where we were less likely to be overheard. Mrs. Patterson looked older than when I'd last seen her at the wedding, more fragile somehow. But her eyes held a determination that reminded me of the teacher who'd fought so hard to nurture Sarah's artistic talents. "I've been following Sarah's life through social media," she began, stirring her coffee with hands that shook slightly. "I kept hoping she'd find her way back to her art, back to the person she used to be. But watching her these past few years, it's been heartbreaking." She paused, seeming to gather her courage for what she was about to say. "Last week, I was at the hospital visiting a friend, and I saw Sarah there. She was in the parking lot, sitting in her car, crying. Not just crying, sobbing like her heart was breaking. I almost went to her, but then Marcus came out and got in the car, and the way he spoke to her." Mrs. Patterson shook her head, her face filled with disgust. "He didn't comfort her or ask what was wrong. He told her to stop making a scene, that people might see her, that she needed to pull herself together because they had dinner plans. He was more concerned about appearances than about his wife's obvious distress." This wasn't particularly surprising, given what I'd observed about Marcus over the years. But Mrs. Patterson wasn't finished. "John, I teach at the community college now, and I have access to resources that might interest you. Databases, public records, that sort of thing." After seeing Sarah that day, I decided to do some research on Marcus Thompson. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, placing it on the table between us. What I found, it's not pretty. Inside the folder were printouts of court records, business filings, newspaper articles, a paper trail that painted a very different picture of Marcus Thompson than the one he presented to the world. "He's been married before," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "Twice, actually. Both marriages ended badly, and both ex-wives filed restraining orders against him." My heart started pounding as I scanned the documents. Charges of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, isolation from family and friends. The patterns were identical to what Sarah was experiencing. "There's more," Mrs. Patterson continued. "His business isn't as successful as he pretends. He's been investigated for fraud, tax evasion, and unethical business practices. The family dealerships are heavily in debt, and there are rumors that he's been using shell companies to hide assets and avoid creditors." The picture that emerged was of a man who was not only abusive but also a fraud. Everything Sarah thought she'd gained by marrying him, financial security, social status, a successful future, was built on lies and deception. But the most damning piece of information was in a police report from his first marriage. His ex-wife had accused him of forcing her to lie to her own family, to make false accusations against her parents in order to isolate her from their support. It was exactly what he was doing to Sarah. The same playbook, the same manipulation tactics, the same systematic destruction of family relationships. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked Mrs. Patterson. "Because Sarah needs to know the truth," she said firmly. "She deserves to know who she really married. And because you and Margaret don't deserve to have your lives destroyed by a man who makes a career out of manipulating and abusing women." I stared at the documents spread across the table, feeling a mixture of hope and dread. This information could save Sarah, could show her exactly what Marcus was doing to her and why. But it could also destroy her completely if she wasn't ready to hear it. "What do you think I should do with this?" I asked. Mrs. Patterson leaned forward, her eyes intense with the same passion she'd once brought to nurturing young artists. "I think," she said slowly, "that it's time for Marcus Thompson to discover that some people fight back. And that sometimes, the truth has a way of setting everyone free, even when the process is painful." For the first time in a week, I felt something other than despair. I felt the stirring of hope, and beneath that, the beginning of a plan that would give Marcus exactly what he deserved. Armed with Mrs. Patterson's research, I spent the next 2 weeks diving deeper into Marcus Thompson's real history. What I discovered was even worse than I'd initially thought. Marcus wasn't just an abuser, he was a predator who specifically targeted vulnerable young women from modest backgrounds, women who were impressed by his wealth and social status, women who could be convinced that marrying him would elevate them to a better life. His first wife, Jennifer, had been a waitress he'd met at a country club event where she was working catering. She'd been 19, just like Sarah, when he'd swept her off her feet with expensive dinners, lavish gifts, and promises of a fairy tale life. The pattern was identical: rapid courtship, elaborate wedding paid for by his family, gradual isolation from her support system, followed by increasing control and manipulation. When Jennifer finally tried to leave him after 2 years of marriage, he'd launched a vicious campaign to destroy her credibility, claiming she'd stolen money from him and manipulated his emotions. It had taken Jennifer 3 years and most of her family's savings to prove her innocence and get the divorce finalized. By then, her relationships with her parents and siblings had been so damaged by Marcus's lies and manipulations that some of them had never fully recovered. His second wife, Patricia, had lasted slightly longer, 3 years, but her story was remarkably similar. Another young woman from a working-class family, another whirlwind romance, another systematic campaign of isolation and control. Patricia had been smarter or luckier than Jennifer. She'd managed to document some of Marcus's abusive behavior and had gathered evidence of his fraudulent business practices. But she'd also paid a heavy price for fighting back. Marcus had used his family's money and connections to drag out the legal proceedings, forcing her to spend everything she had on lawyers while he painted her as a gold digger and a liar. Both women had eventually escaped, but not before Marcus had nearly destroyed them financially and emotionally. And now he was doing the same thing to my daughter. The business research was equally damning. The Thompson family dealerships were indeed in serious financial trouble. Marcus had been using increasingly desperate tactics to keep money flowing, inflating trade-in values, manipulating loan applications, even selling cars that were still under lien to other dealers. He was living on borrowed time and borrowed money, maintaining the appearance of success while the foundation of his business empire crumbled beneath him. The expensive lifestyle, the country club membership, the lavish wedding he'd thrown for Sarah, it was all financed with money that didn't really exist. Which explained why he was so desperate to control Sarah completely. She wasn't just a wife to him, she was a shield, a respectable front that helped legitimize his business dealings. And her family, us, represented a threat to that carefully constructed facade. If Sarah maintained close relationships with people who knew her true nature, who remembered who she'd been before Marcus got his hands on her, she might start questioning the life he'd built around her. She might start seeing through his manipulation and realizing what he'd taken from her. So he had to cut those ties completely. The false accusations about the money weren't just about isolating Sarah from us, they were about destroying our credibility so thoroughly that even if we tried to warn her about who he really was, she wouldn't believe us. But Marcus had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed that we would react the way his previous victims' families had reacted, with shock, shame, and eventually capitulation. He'd expected us to either pay his extortion demands or slink away in defeat. He hadn't counted on us fighting back with the truth. Working with Mrs. Patterson, I began reaching out to Jennifer and Patricia, Marcus's ex-wives. It took some detective work to find them, both had changed their names and moved to different states after their divorces, but eventually I tracked them down. Jennifer was living in Oregon now, working as a nurse and married to a man who, from what I could tell through social media, treated her with the respect and kindness she deserved. When I called her, she was initially suspicious and reluctant to talk. "Why are you asking about Marcus?" she wanted to know. "Are you working for him? Because if you are, you can tell him I have nothing more to say. The restraining order is still in effect. He's married to my daughter," I explained. "And he's doing to her exactly what he did to you." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with pain and anger. "How old is she?" 22 now. She was 19 when they met. Of course she was. Jennifer's laugh was bitter. "He has a type, doesn't he? Young, idealistic girls from families that don't have enough money to fight him properly." Over the course of a 2-hour conversation, Jennifer told me her story in detail. The similarities to Sarah's experience were uncanny, right down to the way Marcus had convinced her to abandon her college plans and focus on being the wife he needed her to be. The worst part, Jennifer said, wasn't the emotional abuse or even the lies he told about my family. The worst part was how completely he made me lose myself. By the end of our marriage, I couldn't even remember who I'd been before I met him. He'd convinced me that my entire identity was wrapped up in being his wife, in meeting his expectations. "How did you finally break free?" I asked. "My sister," she said simply. "She never gave up on me, never stopped trying to reach me, even when I was horrible to her because Marcus told me she was jealous and trying to sabotage my marriage. When she finally showed me evidence of his affairs, his business fraud, his history with other women, it was like waking up from a nightmare." Affairs. That was something I hadn't uncovered in my research. He was cheating on you. Constantly. With clients' wives, with women he met at business events, even with some of his employees. He was very good at hiding it, but my sister hired a private investigator. The photos were devastating. I felt sick thinking about Sarah, wondering if Marcus was betraying her in this way too, adding infidelity to the long list of ways he was destroying her life. Patricia's story, when I reached her a few days later, was remarkably similar but with one crucial difference. She had fought back from the beginning, documenting Marcus's behavior and gathering evidence of his manipulation. "I knew something was wrong from early in our marriage," she told me during our phone conversation. "My family tried to warn me, but I thought I knew better. It wasn't until Marcus started trying to turn me against them, started insisting that they were jealous of our success, that I began to see the pattern. Patricia had kept detailed journals throughout her marriage, recording Marcus's controlling behaviors, his financial manipulations, and his attempts to isolate her from her support system. When she'd finally decided to leave, she'd had ammunition. But even with all that evidence, she warned me, it was still a nightmare. Marcus doesn't just let go. He fights dirty, and he has resources that most people don't. If you're planning to expose him, you need to be prepared for him to come after you with everything he's got. What would you do if you were in my position? I asked. Patricia was quiet for a moment. I'd document everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every inconsistency in his story. And then I'd find a way to show your daughter the truth about who she married, not just what he's done to you, but what he's done to other people, what he's likely doing to her that she doesn't even recognize yet. And if she doesn't believe it? If she's too deeply under his influence? Then you save the evidence, Patricia said firmly. Because eventually, if he follows his pattern, she's going to start seeing cracks in his facade. And when that happens, when she's ready to face the truth, you want to be ready to help her. Over the following days, both Jennifer and Patricia provided me with copies of court documents, police reports, and other evidence from their marriages to Marcus. The picture that emerged was of a man who was not just abusive but also methodical in his abuse, following the same playbook with each victim. More importantly, they gave me something I hadn't expected: hope. Both women had escaped. Both had rebuilt their lives. Both had found happiness and peace after Marcus Thompson. If they could do it, maybe Sarah could too. But first, I had to find a way to reach her, to break through the wall of fear and manipulation that Marcus had built around her. And I had to do it in a way that wouldn't push her further into his control. The plan I eventually developed was risky, possibly even dangerous. But it was also the only chance I could see to save my daughter from the man who was systematically destroying her life. The deadline Marcus had given us was approaching fast. We had 2 days left to decide whether we would pay his extortion demands or face his threatened legal action. But instead of preparing our surrender, Margaret and I were preparing for war. I'd spent the previous week organizing all the evidence I'd gathered about Marcus's true nature. Court documents from his previous marriages. Police reports detailing abuse allegations. Business records showing his financial improprieties. Testimony from his ex-wives about his patterns of manipulation and control. It was a devastating collection of material, painting a clear picture of a man who made a career out of preying on vulnerable young women. But having the evidence was only half the battle. The other half was figuring out how to use it effectively. I couldn't just dump all this information on Sarah. 3 years of systematic manipulation had trained her to distrust anything that contradicted Marcus's version of reality. If I came at her directly with accusations about her husband, she would likely dismiss it as jealousy or desperation, exactly the way Marcus had programmed her to respond. No, I needed a different approach. I needed to create a situation where Sarah would discover the truth herself, in a way that Marcus couldn't spin or explain away. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. On Thursday evening, Margaret answered the phone to find Sarah on the other end, her voice shaky and upset. "Mom, can I talk to Dad? I need to ask him something." Margaret gestured for me to take the call, her eyes filled with concern at Sarah's tone. "Hi, sweetheart. What's wrong?" "Dad, Marcus wants an answer about the money situation. He says you need to decide by tomorrow whether you're going to pay what you owe or deal with the consequences." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and I could hear the strain in every word. This was costing her, having to make this call, having to threaten her own parents on her husband's behalf. "Sarah," I said gently, "can I ask you something? And I want you to really think about your answer." Okay. Do you actually remember us asking you for money? I don't mean what Marcus has told you happened. I mean your own actual memory of conversations where your mother and I asked you to borrow money from you. The silence stretched for so long I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was even quieter than before. I remember you being stressed about bills sometimes. I remember Mom worrying about the cost of car repairs, or whether you could afford the dentist. And I wanted to help, so you what, sweetheart? So I would transfer money into your account. Without asking. Because I knew you were too proud to accept help, but I could see you were struggling, and I had more than I needed. There it was. The truth, finally. Sarah hadn't been giving us money because we'd asked for it or manipulated her into it. She'd been secretly helping us because she loved us and wanted to ease our financial stress. And Marcus had taken those acts of love and generosity and twisted them into evidence of our supposed greed and manipulation. How many times did you do that, Sarah? I don't know. Maybe 6 or 7 times over 2 years. Never huge amounts, a few hundred here and there when I knew you were having a tough month. My heart broke for her, for the generous, loving impulse that Marcus had perverted into something ugly and shameful. And you never told us you were doing this? No, because I knew you'd make me stop. You and Mom are so stubborn about accepting help. Sarah, listen to me very carefully. Your mother and I never knew you were putting money in our account. We thought those deposits were errors, or maybe automatic transfers we'd forgotten about. We never spent that money because we didn't know where it came from. What? Her voice was sharp with confusion. The money is still there, sweetheart. Every penny you ever sent us. It's been sitting in a savings account because we were afraid to touch money we couldn't account for. I could hear her sharp intake of breath, the sound of her world shifting as she processed what I'd just told her. But Marcus said, he said you called asking for money. He said you manipulated me, made me feel guilty. Has he ever played you recordings of these supposed conversations? Has he ever shown you actual evidence that we asked for money? No, he showed me the bank statements. He said the timing proved. The timing proved that our daughter loves us and wanted to help when she thought we were struggling. It proved that you're generous and kind, not that we're manipulative thieves. Sarah was crying now, deep, wrenching sobs that told me she was beginning to understand the full scope of what Marcus had done. Sarah, I need you to listen to me. Can you get away from the house tomorrow? Can you meet me somewhere private where we can talk? I don't know. Marcus doesn't like me going places without him. He says it's dangerous for a woman in my position to be alone in public. More control, more isolation disguised as protection. This is important, sweetheart. More important than you realize. There are things you need to know, things about Marcus that he's been hiding from you. Dad, don't. Please don't make me choose between. I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to learn the truth. After that, any choices you make will be yours to make. The line was quiet except for the sound of her crying. Finally, she spoke. There's a coffee shop downtown. Marion's Place. I could meet you there at 2 o'clock tomorrow. But I can't stay long. Marcus will expect me home by 4 for a dinner party we're hosting. That's enough time, I assured her. Sarah, I want you to know that no matter what happens tomorrow, no matter what you decide after you hear what I have to tell you, your mother and I love you. That's never going to change. I love you too, Dad, she whispered, and for the first time in years, she sounded like my daughter again. After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen with Margaret, both of us emotionally drained by the conversation but also hopeful. Sarah was starting to see cracks in Marcus's version of reality. Tomorrow, I would show her just how deep those cracks ran. But I also knew that what I was about to do would likely trigger a massive response from Marcus. He wouldn't let Sarah go without a fight, and when he realized he was losing control of her, he would become dangerous. I spent that night making copies of all the evidence I'd gathered, storing them in different locations, preparing for the war that was about to begin. Because I knew that saving my daughter was going to cost everything I had, and Marcus Thompson wasn't going to make it easy. But she was worth it. She was worth everything. I arrived at Marion's place 30 minutes early, choosing a corner table where we could talk privately. The coffee shop was one of those cozy, local places that Sarah had loved in high school, the kind of authentic, unpretentious environment that had no place in her current world of country clubs and society events. When she walked in, my heart nearly broke. She was thin, too thin, and despite her expensive clothes and perfect makeup, she looked fragile, almost breakable. She moved like someone who was constantly braced for criticism or disappointment. But when she saw me, her face lit up with a smile that reminded me of the daughter I remembered. For just a moment, the years of manipulation and control seemed to fall away, and she was my little girl again. "Hi, Dad," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I ordered us both coffee. I remember you like it black." It was such a simple thing, but it meant everything. She remembered. Despite everything Marcus had done to her, despite all his attempts to make her forget who she'd been before him, she still remembered small details about the people she'd once loved. "Thank you, sweetheart. How are you? And I want a real answer, not what you think I want to hear." Sarah's smile faltered, and I saw exhaustion in her eyes. "I'm tired, I guess. It's hard work, being the wife Marcus needs me to be. There are so many expectations, so many ways to get things wrong. What happens when you get things wrong?" She was quiet for a moment, stirring sugar into her coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "He doesn't yell or anything dramatic. He just withdraws. He makes it clear that I've disappointed him, that I'm not living up to my potential as his partner. And then I have to work twice as hard to prove that I deserve his love and patience. Emotional manipulation, textbook style. Keep the victim constantly off balance, constantly working to earn approval that's never quite within reach." "Sarah, do you remember what you were like before you married Marcus? What you wanted from life?" I was naive, she said automatically, but there was something wistful in her voice. "I had unrealistic dreams, impractical goals. Marcus helped me understand what was actually possible. What if I told you that the dreams you gave up weren't impractical? What if they were exactly the kinds of dreams you should have been pursuing?" She shook her head. "Dad, I know you mean well, but you don't understand the real world. Marcus has shown me things, introduced me to people, given me opportunities that I never would have had otherwise." "What kinds of opportunities?" She paused, and I could see her struggling to come up with specific examples. "Well, I'm involved in charity work now. Important causes that make a real difference." "What causes?" Another pause. "Marcus chooses them. He knows which charities are most respected, which events are most important for our social obligations. Do any of them actually interest you? Do you feel passionate about the work you're doing?" "Passion is a luxury," she said, echoing what she told us at Christmas. "Adults have responsibilities, obligations. They don't get to just follow their hearts." I leaned forward, speaking gently but firmly. "Sarah, I want to show you some things. Documents, information about Marcus that I think you need to see. But before I do, I need you to promise me something." Her face went pale. "What kind of information?" "Promise me you'll look at everything with an open mind. That you'll consider the possibility that there are things about your husband that you don't know." "Dad, I can't." "You don't have to make any decisions today. You don't have to leave him or change anything about your life. I just want you to see the truth about who you married. After that, what you do with that information is entirely up to you." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the internal battle playing out in her eyes. 3 years of conditioning told her to refuse, to get up and leave, to report this conversation to Marcus. But somewhere deeper, the daughter I'd raised was curious about the truth. "Show me," she said quietly. I opened the folder I'd brought and began laying out the documents methodically. First, the court records from Marcus's previous marriages. Then the police reports detailing abuse allegations. Finally, the business records showing his financial improprieties. Sarah read in silence, her face growing paler with each page. I watched her carefully, seeing the exact moment when the implications of what she was reading hit home. He was married twice before, she whispered. Yes. And both wives accused him of abuse. Emotional and financial abuse. The same patterns you're experiencing now. She looked up at me with eyes full of confusion and pain. But that's not. Marcus told me he'd only been married once before, briefly, to someone who turned out to be unstable and manipulative. He lied to you, Sarah. Just like he's lied about so many other things. She went back to reading, and I watched her face as she processed the details. The way Marcus had isolated his previous wives from their families. The way he'd controlled their finances, their social connections, their daily activities. The way he'd convinced them to abandon their own dreams and ambitions to focus on being the wives he needed them to be. This woman, Jennifer, Sarah said, pointing to one of the court documents. She says Marcus forced her to make false accusations against her parents. He made her claim they were stealing money from her. Does that sound familiar? Sarah's hands were shaking now as she set the papers down. He's doing the same thing to me. The exact same thing. Yes. But why? Why would he want to destroy my relationship with you and Mom? Because as long as you have people in your life who love you unconditionally, who remember who you were before him, you have a frame of reference for what healthy relationships look like. He needs to be your only source of validation, your only connection to the outside world. Sarah put her head in her hands, and I could see her shoulders shaking as she cried. I've lost myself completely, haven't I? I don't even remember who I used to be. You were an artist, I said gently. You were creative, passionate, independent. You cared about people, about making the world more beautiful. You had dreams that were worth pursuing. I gave all that up. You were convinced to give it up. There's a difference. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. Dad, what do I do? How do I get back to who I used to be? Before I could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and her face went white. It's Marcus. He's asking where I am, who I'm with. He says he needs me to come home immediately. How does he know you're not at home? He has an app on my phone. He can track my location. She said this like it was completely normal, like all husbands monitored their wives' movements electronically. Sarah, that's not normal. That's not healthy. He's tracking you because he doesn't trust you to make your own decisions about where to go and who to see. But he says it's for my safety. It's for his control. Look at these documents again. Look at what his ex-wives say about his behavior. This is the same pattern, the same methods. Sarah stared at her phone as it buzzed again, then again. He's getting angry. If I don't go home now, there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? He'll withdraw. He won't speak to me for days. He'll make it clear that I've betrayed his trust, that I've chosen other people over our marriage. And then I'll have to spend weeks proving that I'm sorry, that I'm committed to being the wife he deserves. Sarah, do you hear yourself? You're describing a prison, not a marriage. She stood up abruptly, gathering the documents. I have to go. If he finds out I was here, if he knows what you showed me. Take the papers with you. Read them again when you're alone. Think about what they mean. I can't. He goes through my things. He says it's because he wants to be involved in every aspect of my life, but if he found these. I stood up and took her hands in mine. Sarah, listen to me. You don't have to live like this. There are people who can help you, resources available for women in your situation. My situation? You're being abused, sweetheart. Emotionally, psychologically, financially. Everything in these documents, everything his ex-wives went through, it's happening to you right now. She pulled her hands away, shaking her head. I can't think about this now. I have to go home. I have to figure out how to explain where I've been. Tell him the truth. Tell him you were meeting with me to discuss the money situation. And if he asks what we discussed, tell him we talked about repayment terms. Which is actually true, we did discuss how we're going to resolve this situation. Sarah looked confused. What do you mean? I mean that I'm not going to pay Marcus money we don't owe for theft that never happened. And I'm not going to let him destroy our family with lies and manipulation. Dad, you can't fight him. He has lawyers, resources, connections. He'll destroy you. Maybe. But I'd rather be destroyed fighting for the truth than surrender to his lies. Sarah hugged me then, a real hug for the first time in years. I love you, Dad. Whatever happens, I want you to know that. I love you too, sweetheart. And I'm going to fight for you, even if you can't fight for yourself right now. She left then, hurrying out to her car and driving away toward the prison she called home. But something had changed in that coffee shop. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah had seen Marcus clearly, had recognized the patterns of control and manipulation that defined their relationship. The question was, what would she do with that knowledge? The next 24 hours were some of the most tense of my life. I'd given Sarah information that could shatter her marriage and destroy the life she thought she'd built. But I'd also potentially put her in danger, because men like Marcus don't react well when they start losing control. Margaret and I waited by the phone, jumping every time it rang, hoping for word from Sarah but also dreading what that word might be. When the call finally came, it wasn't from Sarah herself, it was from someone I'd never expected to hear from. Is this John Henderson? The voice was female, professional, controlled. Yes, who is this? My name is Patricia Williams. I was Patricia Thompson before my divorce. You called me last week about Marcus. Patricia. Marcus's second ex-wife. I sat up straighter, gesturing for Margaret to come listen. Patricia, yes. Thank you for calling. Is everything all right? I hope so, but I'm not sure. I got a very disturbing call this morning from a woman named Sarah. She said she was Marcus's current wife and that she'd gotten my number from some documents you'd shown her. My heart started pounding. Sarah had reached out to Patricia. That was either a very good sign or a very dangerous development. What did she say? She wanted to know if the things in those court documents were true. If Marcus had really done the things I'd accused him of. She sounded fragile. Scared. Like someone who's been living in a state of constant anxiety. That describes her pretty accurately. What did you tell her? The truth. I told her everything, not just what's in the official records, but the day-to-day reality of being married to Marcus Thompson. The isolation, the control, the way he systematically destroys your sense of self-worth until you can't imagine surviving without him. How did she react? She cried. A lot. She kept saying that she recognized everything I was describing, that it was like I was telling the story of her own life. This was exactly what I'd hoped for. Sarah was making the connections, seeing the patterns, understanding that she wasn't crazy or oversensitive, she was being systematically abused. Did she say what she plans to do with this information? That's why I'm calling you, Patricia said, and I heard concern in her voice. She's not ready to leave him. She's too scared, too beaten down. But she's also starting to resist, and that's when Marcus becomes most dangerous. What do you mean? When I started questioning Marcus, when I began to see through his manipulation, he didn't just increase the emotional abuse. He started threatening me, my family, my job. He made it clear that if I tried to leave, he would destroy everyone I cared about. My blood ran cold. Do you think he'll threaten Sarah? I think he's probably already threatening her, just in more subtle ways. But if he realizes she's been talking to you, if he understands that she's starting to see him clearly. Yes, I think he could become physically dangerous. Margaret grabbed my arm, her face pale with worry. Our daughter was potentially in immediate danger, and we had no way to help her. What should we do? I asked. Document everything. Every conversation, every threat, every attempt at manipulation. And be ready to help her when she's ready to ask for it. Because if she follows the pattern of his other wives, there's going to come a moment when she realizes she can't live like this anymore. How long did it take you to reach that point? 3 years, Patricia said quietly. 3 years of gradually losing myself before I finally understood that staying with him was going to kill me, one way or another. After Patricia hung up, Margaret and I sat in our kitchen, both of us terrified for Sarah but also powerless to help her directly. We couldn't force her to leave Marcus, and any overt attempt to intervene would likely make things worse for her. But we could prepare for the moment when she decided to save herself. Over the next week, I threw myself into research and preparation. I contacted domestic abuse organizations, learning about resources available to women in Sarah's situation. I researched divorce lawyers who specialized in cases involving manipulation and financial abuse. I even looked into safe houses and relocation services, in case Sarah needed to disappear completely to escape Marcus's influence. Margaret, meanwhile, focused on the emotional preparation. She read everything she could find about helping abuse survivors, about rebuilding relationships that had been damaged by manipulation, about supporting someone who was trying to rediscover their identity after years of being controlled. But even as we prepared, Sarah remained silent. No phone calls, no text messages, no contact at all. The only sign that she was still alive was her continued presence on social media, where she posted carefully curated images of her perfect life with Marcus. Except now, knowing what I knew, I could see the truth behind those pictures. In every photo, Sarah's smile looked forced, brittle. Her eyes held a sadness that no amount of expensive makeup could hide. She was performing happiness rather than living it. 2 weeks after our meeting at the coffee shop, I got another call, this time from Mrs. Patterson. "John, I think you need to know about something I saw yesterday." "What is it?" "I was at the grocery store, and I saw Sarah there with Marcus. She was pushing the cart while he walked beside her, and he was criticizing everything she put in it. Her choices weren't healthy enough, or they were too expensive, or they weren't the brands he preferred." This didn't sound immediately alarming, lots of couples have different shopping preferences. But Mrs. Patterson continued. But it was more than that. She looked terrified of making the wrong choice. She would reach for something, then look at him for approval before putting it in the cart. And when she picked up a box of the cereal she apparently liked, he took it out of her hands and put it back, telling her she needed to think about her figure. Control over food choices. Another classic sign of an abusive relationship. "Did they see you?" Marcus didn't, but Sarah did. She started to wave, like she was happy to see me, but then she caught herself and looked away quickly. Like she was afraid of getting in trouble for acknowledging someone from her past. My heart ached for my daughter, reduced to being afraid of greeting her former teacher in a grocery store. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you to do something that might sound strange." "What is it?" "I need you to start documenting these encounters. Dates, times, what you observed. If Sarah ever decides to leave Marcus, she's going to need evidence of his controlling behavior." "You think she's planning to leave?" "I think she's starting to understand what's happening to her. And when that understanding reaches a critical point, she's going to need all the help she can get." What I didn't tell Mrs. Patterson was that I was already putting my own plan into motion. Marcus had given me an ultimatum about the money, threatening to destroy us if we didn't pay. But instead of surrendering to his demands, I was about to turn the tables on him. It was time for Marcus Thompson to discover that some people don't go down without a fight. And sometimes, the truth has a way of setting everyone free, even when the process is painful and dangerous. The next phase of my plan would either save my daughter or destroy us all. But doing nothing wasn't an option anymore. Sarah was running out of time, and so was I. On a Friday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after Marcus's ultimatum, I walked into the offices of the largest law firm in the county. Not to surrender to his demands, but to launch my own offensive. I'd chosen attorney Rebecca Martinez based on her reputation for handling complex cases involving fraud and abuse. She was expensive, more than Margaret and I could really afford, but she was also exactly what I needed, someone with the skill and resources to take on Marcus Thompson at his own game. "Mr. Henderson," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her impressive mahogany desk. "I've reviewed the materials you sent me, and I have to say, this is one of the most systematic cases of manipulation and abuse I've seen in 20 years of practice." She opened a thick file and began laying out the evidence I'd gathered. Court documents from Marcus's previous marriages. Business records showing his financial improprieties. Witness statements from his ex-wives detailing his patterns of control and manipulation. "The question is," she continued, "what exactly do you want to accomplish here? Do you want to file a criminal complaint? Pursue civil action? Or are you primarily focused on protecting your daughter?" "All of the above," I said firmly. "I want Marcus Thompson exposed for what he is. I want his ability to hurt other women eliminated. And I want my daughter free from his control." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "Then we're going to need to be strategic about this. Going after Marcus directly might put your daughter in more danger. But there are other approaches that could be more effective." She pulled out a legal pad and began sketching out a plan that was more comprehensive than anything I'd imagined. "First, we file complaints with the State Attorney General's office about his business practices. Based on these financial records, he's violated numerous consumer protection laws. That triggers an official investigation." "How does that help Sarah?" "Because once there's an official investigation, Marcus's business reputation is damaged. His social standing, which is a huge part of his power over your daughter, begins to crumble. And if the investigation uncovers criminal activity, he could face real legal consequences." Rebecca continued outlining the strategy. They would also file complaints with the Better Business Bureau, the automotive industry regulatory boards, and every professional organization that Marcus belonged to. They would leak information to investigative journalists who specialized in exposing business fraud. "We're going to create a perfect storm of scrutiny around Marcus Thompson," she explained. "Not just from one source, but from multiple directions simultaneously. He won't be able to control the narrative or use his connections to make problems disappear." "What about the false accusations he's made against us?" "That's actually the easiest part to handle," Rebecca smiled grimly. "We have bank records showing that your daughter deposited money into your accounts without your knowledge or consent. We have documentation that you never spent that money, that it's still sitting in a separate savings account. His entire story falls apart under basic scrutiny. But the most important part of the plan involved Sarah herself. Your daughter is going to need support when Marcus's world starts collapsing," Rebecca explained. "Men like him don't accept defeat gracefully. As his power and status erode, he's likely to become more controlling, more desperate. That's when abused spouses are most at risk." She handed me a list of resources: domestic violence hotlines, safe houses, support groups for abuse survivors. She'd also arranged for a therapist who specialized in helping victims of psychological abuse to be available on short notice. "The goal is to have everything in place so that when your daughter is ready to leave, and she will be ready, probably sooner than you think, she can do so safely and with comprehensive support." I left Rebecca's office feeling hopeful for the first time in months. Marcus had built his power on lies, manipulation, and the assumption that his victims wouldn't fight back. But he'd never faced someone who had the resources and determination to expose him systematically. The first phase of our counterattack launched the following Monday. Rebecca filed complaints with multiple state agencies simultaneously, each one triggering its own investigation into Marcus's business practices. By Tuesday, investigators were showing up at his dealerships, demanding to examine financial records and interview employees. The local business journal picked up the story by Wednesday, running a front-page article about the multiple investigations into Thompson Automotive. By Thursday, the story had been picked up by regional media, and Marcus's reputation as a successful, respected businessman was beginning to unravel. I monitored his social media accounts obsessively, watching his carefully curated image start to crack. The posts about successful business deals and social events became less frequent. The confident, arrogant tone of his earlier posts was replaced by defensive statements about politically motivated attacks and jail. So, the story doesn't end here. Stay tuned for the next part.